Hello, everybody. Today I'm joined by James M. Hewitt, and we're going to be talking about his latest venture, Myth and Goal, from Blacklist Games.
Hello.
So it's a pleasure to have you back on the channel.
It's lovely to be back. Always a joy to come and see you folks.
Even if only virtually.
Yeah.
So right off the bat, I think we need to get stuck into this. And people have seen teasers, and a lot of people have gone, oh, teasers. What are they really telling us? What is going on with Myth and Goal? So what is it beyond what we know, fantasy and American football combined?
So Myth and Goal, let's go back to the start. So Adam from Blacklist Games contacted me a year and a half ago, maybe. I forget. Time has gone weird in the past 12 months.
We've noticed.
But he contacted me. We've been chatting for a while, and he wanted to talk about potentially doing a game with Blacklist Games. And what was happening was they have been doing a lot of like miniatures ranges, single piece plastic miniatures, like PVC, high quality sculpts, with kind of an aim to just helping people build a nice miniatures collection quickly. So they did the Fantasy Series 1. They've had
horror series?
Dire Lights of the horror series, exactly. And so they were like, well, actually, there's a thing which is kind of underserved, which is there are loads of third-party Blood Bowl teams out there, which are lovely, and there's some fantastic variety. But if someone just wants to get a collection of Blood Bowl teams in one hit, you're looking at quite a high price point. Because a lot of them are like, they're metal, they're resin. There's the GW teams, which are lovely in plastic. But I think the thing is that the third-party Blood Bowl team, range has grown massively, especially in the years when Games Workshop weren't supporting the game directly. Sure. So many companies, took up the torch and ran with it. And so what Blacklist wanted to do was kind of come into that and go, here is a set of one piece, ready to go, game-worthy miniatures, which you can just open up and you've got like 4 teams, good to go, out the box. But they were like, they didn't want to just release the teams. They were like, they wanted to make a game with it because they're Blacklist Games. Adam and Brady, who are the 2 guys I've been dealing with, they've got a great history of designing games. Adam worked on things like Descent. He's on loads of Fantasy Flight. And they wanted to have a game because mainly they hadn't yet found a sports game that kind of ticked all their boxes. They like Blood Bowl, but it takes a really long time to play, and it's really granular in a way which is fantastic once you know it, but really hard to get into it.
Yeah.
I worked on Blood Bowl for about a year with Games Workshop, and I love it to bits, but it's not a game you can easily introduce to new players, especially people that are used to modern games. Yeah. Because it is very much rooted in the 90s, Yeah. And then Blitz Bowl, which is the game that I designed for Games Workshop, and I just left it the first freelance thing I did as Needy Cat Games, which was very much designed as a gateway product. So that's much more of a modern game, but it lacks all of the leveling up and league play and all that kind of thing. So they wanted to make something which was kind of ticking all of their boxes and supporting their miniatures range as well. So it's kind of it's doing several things at once. So what Myth and Goal is, to get back to the question, is it's a fantasy sports game for 1 to 2 players. Yes, solo play is an option. This is a really big key thing in development. It's a game which it's not really based on like American football. There are some similarities, a lot fewer similarities than you see in Blood Bowl. Right. But certainly you've got all the kind of familiar sorts of players you expect to see. Some players are really good at throwing the ball. Some players are really good at catching. Some are good at hitting people. But it's a game which is it's a sport. You're playing competitively, either against another player or against the game. And the decisions you're making in Myth and Goal are much more on like a team level than maybe they are in say, Blood Bowl. So, for example, I wanted to put the players into the shoes of a team manager. So they're referred to as the manager in the rules. And when you're a team manager, you're thinking not only about what is happening on the table in front of you, on the board, on the field. Sure. You're not just thinking like, what moves am I making this turn? You're thinking ahead, because in Myth and Goal, your players take fatigue. The more actions they take, like you place action tokens on them to show they're taking an action, and those flip into fatigue, which builds up. And if a player takes too much fatigue, they become exhausted. And so you're thinking in terms of strategy for the whole game. Like, I've got my really good squad here that I like using. Do I put them all in at once? and risk some of them being exhausted and not being so good later in the game. Similarly, you have players can gain infractions, like penalties, basically. By pushing themselves, you generally have the option to increase their chances at a thing, but include the chance of them getting an infraction, 3 infractions throughout the game. And so it's a thing which is much more, it's about being a team manager as much as it's about being a tactical.
It's resource management as well as the actual gameplay, which is a fascinating way of doing things, because like you say, the older games, the likes of Blood Bowl, you didn't have to worry so much about that. Yes, occasionally somebody might get thrown off for a foul, but mostly you knew what your players were going to do, and if you had a good game plan, you could just replay that to grind your opponent over and over again. So once you were in a position where you could score in one turn, you could just do that for every turn of the game and your opponent would never get a look in. So having a resource management side of the game that forces you to be more tactical really, I think, expands it and brings it more into the sports arena, for want of a better word, simply because people can't run until they're well, some players can run until they're from the beginning to end of the game, but most players in most games won't be able to do that. It
was something that kind of came at least partially out of designing Blitz Bowl, where in Blitz Bowl, what I found after watching people play it again and again and again, I like to stay vaguely in touch with the games that I've designed. What you would find was there'd always be like 1 or 2 players that weren't used, hanging out the back, because you don't activate every player in a turn. They don't really do much until the time comes when you run out of everyone else. Whereas in this, if you go for a big all-out play with one of your charges, they're now really tired. So you need to let them stand for a couple of turns and do things with other people.
Yeah.
And so you're looking at you're setting yourself up for success in future turns.
Can we just talk about the actual layer of the team?
Yes.
Because 2 things jumped out at me. It's a 1 to 2 player game.
Yep.
But the starter set contains 4 teams.
It does. Yeah.
So right off the bat, that's a bit different from every other game I've ever seen doing a 2-player starter set.
Tell me about it. So this is just a stupidly generous box, and I mean that with. I'm baffled. You know, when we were chatting about it, I was like, "How have you got 4 full teams in this box?" I mean, the price point isn't set yet, but looking at the previous things that Blacklist have done, they all come in around the same sort of roughly $100 point. So I think that's roughly where it's going to be. The value is amazing. I mean, you're getting 4 full Blood Bowl teams. You're getting humans, orcs, dwarves, and elves.
Yeah.
As well as a game, and if that's the case, that's the price of like 3 or 4 Blood Bowl teams without a game.
Yeah,
which is really cool. What's interesting is that the teams, when you play a game of Myth and Goal, your team is 8 players.
Right.
And you have 5 on the pitch at once. You always have 3 in reserve, or 3 that are concussed or off the field. They've been sent off. So you have 5 players, 3 in reserve. But the reason you have twice the number of players in the thing, you basically got 2 shots of the thing. So every player is duplicated once in the box, giving you 8 unique sculpts for each team. The reason that's in there is a free agents thing in the rules, which is where you can customize your team. If you've got a dwarf team and you want to add a bit more mobility to it, you can sub out one of your players for an elf player, for example. You can say, oh, well, I really want the elf vanguard because they're really fast, really nippy. You'll get a slight penalty. Your tactics won't necessarily work in the same way, but it gives the players the freedom to do that. We're even including rules for creating a complete team of free agents if you really want to mix and match.
I'd heard that sort of the Harlem Globetrotters of the myth and Goal world. Yeah, precisely.
And so the whole point is that if you buy this box, you've got 4 16-player Blood Bowl teams, which is a nice, it's a nice, fully comprehensive team to play with. You've also got 4 teams for Myth and Goal plus 4 sets of free agents to make sure that you and 3 players can completely play, a league by yourself. You've got league rules in the game as well, or you can play solo, and we're including like a solo ladder league as well, like playing old like Mortal Kombat or old fighting games, or even like Speedball, where you go up against all the different teams.
Yes,
we kind of want to bring that experience to it. So having all these extra players means that you've got the option to do that with all the options and all the bells and whistles.
Yeah. I suppose that if you're playing with a orc team, then you're still going to come up against an orc team at some point in the league. And
exactly. That's it. The other thing that's interesting, talking about the way that teams function, we wanted to make sure that an orc team isn't always the same. So we knew that the players were set because of there are 8 miniatures being sculpted. So you've got 8 different player positions. So we wanted to add some variety in a different way. So when you create a team, you pick a faction and a focus. A faction determines, orcs, humans, elves, dwarves, the players you have in your team. The focus gives you the way the team plays on the field.
Sure.
So what you see here is these are a couple of focus cards, which you pick one of these alongside your faction card. So playing a devious Durnhold Anvil's dwarf team will give you one way of playing. Playing a nimble Durnhold Anvil's dwarf team will give you a different way of playing.
Yeah.
And what that means is you can either specialize your team down a particular path or diversify it. So a nimble dwarf team is never going to be as nimble as a nimble elf team, but it removes some of the kind of downsides of being a dwarf team, that you're a bit slow.
Yeah.
And what this means is that if you're playing in a league, you've got 6 focuses. We've currently, I'm not sure if it's 6. We might change it somewhere around there. Some number of focuses. Let's say it's 6. You've then got 4 teams. That's 24 different teams in total you can have. So you're not going to have 4 identical dwarf teams in your league, which was really important to me, because I think one of the fun parts of any kind of league game is having a variety of different things to face, right?
Yeah.
And that's before you get into the whole league advancement, players picking up new abilities, teams diversifying in that way. With just the 4 starting teams and the focuses, you've got a whole load of variety.
That, in every respect, that sounds terrific, because I like the idea that you can lean into what you think that faction is. So if you are playing a stompy dwarf team or a punchy orc team, whatever they happen to be, you can just really go with it.
Yeah.
Or you can supplement the perceived weaknesses in a race or a faction. So when people are expecting to punch an elf and come away with the ball, and all of a sudden they discover that elf doesn't really go down as easily, that will upset their game plans.
And one of the key ways that plays in is in the game we have a thing called tactics cards, which these are based on. There's a bunch of sets of cards in the game with little icons on. So you'll see there you've got 2 tactics cards. The one on the left is a generic card. All teams have access to that. On the right, concussive impact, that is a brutal card. So any team with the brutal icon, which you can see in the bottom left-hand corner down there, has access to that card. You get those little set icons from your faction and your focus. And so the focus determines broadly which tactics cards you have access to during a game. And these are generally one-use cards. You pick a hand of 3 of them at the start of each period. The game has 3 periods. And so you have to pick your tactics for that period.
Yeah.
And you play them at given times. They're all one use across the game. But it means that when you play a devious team, they will have access to strategy and dirty tricks tactics cards, or whatever they're being called. The little icons, they don't really have names. The icons are what they're called. But it means that you have an idea of the kind of things your opponent's capable of. And in league play, you can kind of expand that outwards and get access to more tactics cards and things. But it just means that you've kind of got... you've got the ability as a manager to go, this turn I want to do the really cool thing that my team's really good at. There's that card.
And throw it in that way. Well, while we're talking about the actual game itself, I want to have a look at the board, and there's a few things on it, because it's not a standard American football. You've got an end zone. It reminds me a lot more like Australian sort of rules, or rugby, or a combination therein.
It brings a lot of different kind of ideas for sports together. Now, I've worked on several sports games over the years. I'm happily in my pigeonhole at this point. I worked on Dreadball, worked on Blood Bowl, Blitz Bowl, pitched a game to Mantic before Dreadball called Razordisc. So I've done a lot of research on weird sports around the world. Weirdly, it's made me really want to play Kabaddi, and I want to see a Kabaddi board game. Someone come out and do that.
Kabaddi's an amazing game.
It's incredible.
And why we don't see televised Kabaddi, I will never know, because people need to go and Google that if they've never seen a bunch of men holding their breath and attempting to play tag, essentially.
It's incredible. So a lot of influences of different sports have come into this. This is the board. The artwork is lovely. I love how colourful it is. When we switched from like my NAF black and white with a few vague colours mock-up to this, it was such a cool feeling. It's nice. It always feels like the game is finally coming to life.
Yeah, when you can start seeing the assets being laid in there and look at it as a realised thing. So you want to talk us through what's on the board and how it impacts the game then? Absolutely.
Let's look at the field itself, which is the big greeny bit in the middle.
The big green bit,
for anyone who isn't certain. So the field is divided into two halves. You've got the home team on the left there, the away team on the right. There's not generally a huge difference in home and away. It just means the home team starts with the ball in the first period. The away team starts the ball in the second period, and whoever's losing gets it in the third period, with it going to the away team as a tiebreaker. Each team has their own half, and in the middle we've got the midfield row, which is like a bit of no man's land. So at the start of play, the attacker, that's the team with the ball, will set up in their own half of the board. That is the two green rows that are five rows tall. So you set your team up from there, then the defender does the same thing. Let's say the attacker starts the ball, and they're trying to get the ball down to the other end of the field to score. Now, there are two ways of scoring. You've got scoring on goal. At the back of the field, you'll see there's a big wall, which we call the gatehouse. And floating above that, or tethered above that, is the goal. It's a big glowy hoop. So a player can throw the ball through the goal from anywhere on the pitch, but the further away you are, the much harder it is, and the more chance there is going to be an enemy player in the way to intercept. And that scores you a lovely 2 points.
Nice.
Alternatively, you can breach the Bastion. We've got a load of that kind of... we lead into the fantasy terminology, you know. Basically, if you can run the ball into that 3 rows behind the gatehouse, that will score you a tasty 5 points. And that's quite tricky to do, but obviously it's worth it. It scores big. When you score, the player who has scored and any players who are in the opposing Bastion, that is the area behind the gatehouse, or the gate, which is the area directly in front of the goal, they are teleported away to their encampment, which you can see top right and bottom left there. The encampment is kind of a staging area where players who are in play but not currently on the field hang out. Also, players can be sent there if they take too many infractions and have to serve a penalty. But the idea is that if you score, the players who are in the position to quickly score again are then removed from play. So they have to re-enter.
Right.
And what that does is it gives that it's a little subtle catch-up mechanic. In the same way that when you're playing a game of pool, there's a subtle catch-up in that the player who is winning has fewer chances to score, to put on the ball because they have fewer balls. Same thing here. Also, scoring ends your turn immediately, so the other team gets to come back. So that's kind of the way the pitch is laid out and how the game works generally. We also talked about... Sorry, go on.
Sorry, there's no reset like in the likes of Blood Bowl. So once somebody scores, the ball goes back in and keeps play turns on. If
precisely,
you
it's more like what you'll see in Dread Bull or Blitz Bowl, which is where, so as soon as someone has scored, the ball gets dropped into that gate area. That's the boxed out area in the middle of the cut-off section. And the defending team then gets to grab the ball and go.
Run.
And so what it means is that as the attacker, you're thinking of two things. First of all, you're thinking about you don't want to exhaust and overextend your players. So you don't want to kind of over-fatigue your players in the attempt to score. But also, you don't want to go all on the offensive, because if you leave your backfield uncovered, the opposing player will then get the ball back and score back on you. Which you don't want to do. And then, there's other gubbins on there like score tracks and round trackers and lots of stuff. But that is generally, that's the game in a nutshell. And it's all kind of laid out the board like that.
And we've seen briefly the team earlier, and there were a lot of, I suppose, various names. You've mentioned Vanguard, but there are also strikers and sentinels.
Yes.
Is there a strict team composition that people will be building towards, or is it fairly flexible in what you can have?
Yeah, so what we've got is we've got 6 and a half player classes. So you can see we've got Chargers, Guardians, Strikers, Sentinels, Vanguards, and Rangers are our 6 classes. Some teams also have specialists who don't follow the normal kind of pattern of doing things. But the idea is, in the same way that you have your like positions in other games, you've got basically classes, which are ways that a player... It's just a great shorthand so that the manager, the person who's playing, can see at a glance what that player is likely to be good at. And what we've kind of got is there are 6. They're divided into kind of 2 groups. You've got your more impressive players, like the star player types, who are your striker, who is really good at throwing. Cool. Yeah, so chargers who are good at hitting people, and vanguards who are good at like evading enemies and running the ball, catching the ball, that kind of thing. They're like your star players. Yeah, then you have your 3 types of supporting player, who are the guardian, who is generally like a backfield defender, the sentinel, who goes forward and supports other players up the field, either kind of keeping enemies off your vanguard or supporting charges. And then the ranger, who is like a runner. You give them the ball and they generally can just go. They can't, but they can kind of keep their head in a swivel, and they're usually all right in other situations as well. And so these different classes give you an idea of how your team can play. And each team has a set configuration, it's a traditional configuration of 8 players, which has some balance of those. Where the team composition comes in is, as I said, you can switch players out for free agents from other teams, or even from your own team. If you want to go, actually, I really want another. So the Dirthole Anvils, they have 3 guardians, and their guardians all have this rule, which is where their resolve, which is like their defensive stat, gets better if there are other guardians in the same row as them.
Sure.
And if you go, actually, I want to have 6 guardians on my team, you can do that. But if you deviate from like the default, then you get a few minor penalties, mainly in the way your tactics cards work. And then specialists are players who don't conform to any of these sorts of things, and they just do things in their own kind of way.
So the Messies of the mythball world.
Exactly. I'll pretend that I understand football.
That's right. Nobody watching understands either of them.
Good. I'm among friends.
Yeah. So it seems like there's a very simple card system as well for people to get their hands on, to actually get into it as well. These are going to be double-sided then, so when you hit that exhaustion point, if you have pushed people too far, you just flip them. How long do they stay exhausted for?
So what happens basically is you've got your player card. So every player on the field has a card with their rules, which kind of lives at your end of the board. And whenever they take an action, you put a fatigue token on them. At the start of each of your turns, they recover 1 fatigue. And generally, you can also take fatigue to prevent bad things happening to them. So, for example, in a lot of cases, you'll be given the option, when your player gets hit really hard by a tackle, you're given the option, either give them a fatigue or lay them down. And at the bottom right there, you can see a fatigue limit. It's the yellow stat with the kind of 3 diamonds. If you would take fatigue in excess of that, you flip your card to its exhausted side. And that does 2 things. First of all, you can see some of the stats drop. And secondly, you lose your special ability. So that kind of sucks. You don't want that to happen. And that player is then exhausted until they spend time on your bench. So down the side of the board, you've got your bench, which is the 3 player cards who are not in your current team. Until a player goes there, they can't recover from being exhausted. So and that only happens at the end of a period, or once per game, each manager can call a timeout, which is just a one-off. I'm going to use my timeout now, and I can substitute a player. And so getting a player exhausted sucks. Getting like all of your players in the field exhausted really sucks. And we see that with like new players, because they go, I can do loads of actions with this one player and score really quickly, and then their striker falls to the ground and can't do anything.
Overextend too far.
Exactly.
How has that led into designing things like the solo mode then?
Solo play.
Because I love seeing what people come up with when they have to develop an AI for solo play, but this, where you have that balance of resource management as well as having the actual players on the pitch having to perform actions in certain ways, I can see where complexities would come in trying to design a solo mode where you won't accidentally just, I suppose, bait an AI into exhausting their players.
Precisely. It was, I mean, I'm not going to lie, the solo mode has been a massive challenge. We knew from the start we wanted solo play to be in it because, it's a thing that we've not seen elsewhere in sports games. I think I now know why, because it has been really difficult to do it, but I'm really excited with where it is. But also I think it was a thing that, like, Blacklist love putting solo stuff into their games. they like solo games. I've been playing more solo games over lockdown. There's some fantastic solo board games out there now. I think if anything, that's what lockdown has given us is, people like playing games.
Yes.
And if that means against themselves, so be it. And I know that whenever I've been involved in a Kickstarter, there are always a very, very vocal set of people who say, has the game got solo play?
Yeah.
And so we wanted to include that from the start, but it has been a challenge because we wanted to have a set of rules which gives you near enough the experience of playing against another player. It's never going to be exactly the same. It's never going to be the same as sitting down with a person across the table. But we wanted something where the game still functions the same way. All the the actions, the fatigue, the player abilities, all that comes into it. And it's a lot more challenging than writing a set of rules for like a dungeon game. So I've done a lot of like dungeon crawler adventure type games where the AI system is basically some variation of walk towards the heroes and attack them. Yeah. And the complexity is which hero do you go for? Do you have a special attack? Here, you're thinking of so many different things. You've got, field coverage. You've got, do you, if you've got the ball, do you try to shoot this turn? Do you shoot later? And the thing that it really came down to was the game is about risk. At which point does the reward outweigh the risk? At which point to do that? So what we have in the AI system is a thing called the name might change, but currently it's called the risk gauge. And so at the start of each AI turn, the AI team assesses the state of play. And they have a big like swingy risk gauge. It starts there, and if they're winning, i.e., they've got more players standing up, they've got more points, whatever else, it goes this way. And if it's the other way, it goes that way. And where that is determines how risky their plays will be. And so for example, the best example of it is when you make a roll in the game. So the game uses dice. Probably should have mentioned that before now, shouldn't I, really? Yeah, the game uses dice. There we go. So we have a simple dice resolution system where when, say I want to attack one of your players, the rules will say you use this stat from the active player, this stat from the defending player. Each manager rolls a number of dice equal to what that stat is. And the dice will be familiar if you've played Hero Quest or Heroescape, games where you've got a single dice doing different things. Yep. So dice have got a mixture of hits and blocks, slightly more hits than blocks. So if you're the active player, you're looking for hits. If you're the resisting player, your blocks will remove those hits. And you have the option of including what is called the Gambit Die, that's gone through many different names in development. And it's basically a dice which has some really lovely high results in it, but can also give you an infraction. The first infraction a player gets is a warning, but it lives with them for the entire game. That can't be got rid of. The second one, they get sent to their encampment for a penalty. The third one, they are sent out of play completely. They take no more part. And so the Gambit dice, like the fatigue, in the early game, you might go, I'll do that. But as it goes on, you're like, oh no, if I risk this, if I get an infraction, I'm losing my sentinel who I really need right now. And so with the AI rules, depending on where that gauge is, will tell you whether, like, the point at which they will use the Gambit die. And that is, it's really fun. There's still a fair bit of, like the player, if you are playing solo, you are doing actions for the other team, but it's giving you instructions. So it will say, this player will now do its best to try to get the ball. And then you use your best judgment to see how that goes. But then what it does is also there is a small deck of cards. So based on the team's focus, the same way that the human teams have focus, an AI team has a focus as well. And we still have, devious, nimble, and so on and so forth. They have a little deck of cards based on that focus, which will determine the things they do and any little bonuses they get. And so it's modular. So that means if you play an AI nimble Dirthold Anvils team, you'll have a different experience playing a devious AI Dirthold Anvils team. Sure. And and so far the AI system is really fun. It's working, and
working. That's the important one.
I feel like I used to have hair, like before we did this. The AI system may have taken years off my life, but I'm really proud of it. Yeah. So I can't wait for people to have a look at it.
Yeah, it all sounds absolutely fascinating. Do you know, because obviously this is early doors and the Kickstarter isn't even there yet, have you been poked with sticks into writing more, or have they kept you on like a retainer going, if we hit these upper limits, we might want to see an expansion or more teams, or are there certain bits and pieces in there that you can talk about?
We've designed quite a few games for Kickstarter now, some of which have yet to see the light of day. Some games have a long development time, but we always have that conversation about stretch goals and ongoing things. And I probably can't say too much. What I would say is it would be crazy of us not to write more teams. It would be there are some really obvious ways to kind of develop the game in that sort of regard. 4 teams is a great place to start, but who knows how many more there could be.
Yeah.
And I think just keep watching. I mean, I really hope that people will see this. And of course, people are going to have that first reaction of, oh, it's Blood Bowl. But I think what they'll realize is that superficially, it's a fantasy NFL-ish sports game.
Sure. With
a bunch of like fantasy races. But the moment you scratch the surface, you see this is a very different game. I had no interest in writing another Blood Bowl. I've done that.
It already exists.
Yeah, precisely. And what I wanted was a game which can sit on your shelf alongside Blood Bowl, alongside Blitz Bowl, alongside Red Bowl, and give you a different experience.
Sure.
This isn't trying to supplant or replace anything. It's just, to me, it's the same way. I don't know if you're into board games much, but like, games based on trains. There are how many games based on trains or zombies or whatever it might be. A theme and a setting is only one element of the game. And I think people will see there is so much variety on offer. And hopefully they'll see that Myth and Goal brings a whole load of new stuff to the table. And I think that this is a no-brainer for Kickstarter. I think this will do really well. And we're going to be writing stuff for this for some time, I think.
It all sounds fantastic. I look forward to seeing what comes next. Because if there's one thing I've discovered over the past couple of years, you never get a standard game with Needy Cat behind the wheel. Because I have quite a few of your games developed for different companies now, and there's always something unique or different or quirky to it that just sets it apart. And it's exactly what you say. You don't want to retread or rehash the same path that other companies and other games have done before. You need to take it in a new and interesting way. And Myth and Goal sounds like it's going to be an absolutely fantastic, not just gateway game, but game in general, just to introduce people into fantasy football. Listen, folks, we're going to move on. If you have any questions about Myth and Goal, drop them below, and I will do my best to either get them across to James or to the guys at Blacklist, and we'll see how this develops over time. Hopefully, we'll even get you across and play some games, James. That would be
Myth and Goal Academy has got kind of a ring to it, hasn't it?
Doesn't it, though? Yeah, it really does. I'd be all for that.
Absolutely.
So until then, thanks very much. Bye-bye.
Go ahead and check out our other content on screen now. And while you're at it, why not hit subscribe and remember to ding our dong. Go on, you know you want to click it. Go on.